Australia is known for its fighting spirit and its ability to prevail as the underdog, displaying great courage in the face of battle and quite often against all the odds. From the Anzacs at Gallipoli to the diggers in the Vietnam War, Australia has always held its own. However, there is one military campaign in Australia's history that no one should be proud of. Today, on His and Hers History, we cover the epic failure that was the Great Emu War of 1932. Hello and welcome to His and Hers History. I'm your host Aaron and this is my co-host Stephanie. How are you? Doing well?
I'm good. I'm excited for our 20th episode.
This is, you're right, our 20th episode.
We've changed it up a bit just for this episode.
It's our 20th week of doing this. We're still babies in the podcast world, but we thought we would change the way we present today. So normally it's either me presenting to you or you presenting to me, but we're going to present a topic together. So we've chosen the Great Emu War of 1932. Can you remember why we might have chosen this, Steph?
Well, we are patriotic Aussies.
Yes, that's very true. But this is also the first story that you and I sort of discussed maybe doing a podcast on, and this is sort of the thing that spurred us into doing this podcast.
I mean, no one's ever done any YouTube video or podcast about this topic before.
It's definitely out there.
It's not covered. I'm just kidding. It's very popular, but you know what?
We thought we'd cover it anyway because it's funny AF and it's ridiculous and it's Aussie and we're Aussie, so.
That's right. We have more of a claim than anyone else. So
yeah, that's right. Although it takes part in a different part of Australia.
Back off our history.
Yeah, back off. This is our history. And without further ado, let us begin.
Let's go.
So after the First World War, the West Australian government set aside some farmland for veteran soldiers to use in the early 1900s. So I think that was sort of like a thank you to them for participating in the war, and maybe also as something for them to do, maybe, because maybe a few of them lost their jobs.
I think it was a way of boosting the economy as well. After
the war. That's a good way of putting it. So there was roughly 5,000 ex-soldiers that took part in this program, but it is worth noting that the land that they were given was very dry and arid and hardly any good for growing crops or raising cattle or anything like that, but they were able to grow a small amount of wheat. So it's located somewhere between Perth and Kalgoorlie, and that land's very rough, dry and arid.
So this, farmland was very barren, outback, and it was plagued with native animals.
Yes, which we'll touch on a bit later.
So this land was very poor quality and the men barely had enough money to grow their crops and it inevitably failed. They didn't even have enough money to put up fences to keep any wildlife out of the area. Yeah,
so being in the First World War probably didn't pay that well, so they didn't have much funds when they came back by the sounds of it.
Also quite important to note this is during the Great Depression.
Yes, that's very true.
So on top of the poor quality of land and lack of money amongst the men, there was also another problem. The government basically gave them the land, but then left them to their own devices.
And judging by the description of the land and what I know about Western Australia is they just sort of plonked them out in the middle of nowhere and went, yeah, here's some land, but they didn't actually research as to whether it was any good. They just went, you can have it, and didn't think much else of it.
Pretty much. The men also came into another problem. Now, as we said, wheat was one of the only things they could really grow. Nothing else really liked the arid landscape. There is one animal in the Australian outback that really quite enjoys wheat.
That's right. So roaming around the area was large, and I mean very large groups of emus, and they were going around eating any crops that were there. So for those that don't know, I'm pretty sure everyone knows, but an emu is a very, very large native Australian bird that's flightless. I'll describe a bit more about it later. So the government, rather than admit that they had undersold the troops some dodgy land, they decided to blame everything on the emus eating all the crops, when in reality the land was not great for growing any form of vegetation other than the native stuff that was there. So the West Australian Senator Sir George Pearce ordered that ex-soldiers should do what they do best and hunt down the emus and kill them, just like they did in World War I. So it seems like a really odd strategy. They've given these ex-soldiers some land that's infested with emus. And when I say infested, they have every right to be there because they're a native animal. But they're saying, well, it's the reason the crops are so poor is because there's emus eating them all. So you just go and kill all the emus and you'll be right. Hard to argue with that logic, right?
Pretty much. Now, this war has been titled the Great Emu War, and that would make us think that there's lots of participants, lots of casualties.
That's right.
In fact, this is a bit of a different war. In reality, this war was comprised of 3 men, Major G.P.W. Meredith and 2 of his gunners, who actually did see combat, plus a few farmers who also took up arms. So really all you had was 3 guys, and that's about it, really.
Apparently there were some local farmers as
Yeah.
well, but I mean, regardless of whether you're trained in military combat, it's a bird. It's not like you're going into battle against a person that's using tactics against you. I mean, the bird's going to be out there in the wild, so...
Should we talk about the enemy?
We should.
The enemy was around 20,000 strong in this area, and that's a hell of a lot of flightless birds.
That's right. They went into battle with 2 Lewis guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition and a truck. And for those that don't know, a Lewis gun is a gun that was made in the First World War, and I think it saw service up until 1950s. Has about a 500 or 600 rounds per minute fire rate, and it can shoot about 3,000 metres. So this is a serious weapon. It may be old, but a devastating machine gun. And as we'll find out later, the emus are a bit tougher than we might think.
If a human was to face the same thing that these emus face, I don't think they'd have much of a chance.
Yeah, so soldiers in World War One would have been terrified. This thing's firing at you. I looked at a video of it just before we started the podcast. It's scary. It's a machine gun, and it's capable of holding, I think, about 50 or so bullets in a round, and they can just be fired continuously. So it's a devastating weapon.
But the emus seem to be quite okay with it. We'll talk about why. So the average emu stands at about 6 foot and 4 inches, which is larger than your average man.
By quite a bit.
By quite a bit. They can run at speeds of 31 miles per hour or 50 kilometres per hour.
Which is fast. That is very, very fast.
For an animal, absolutely.
They're also known for having the strongest, or some of the strongest legs in the animal world, and they're equipped with a large talon on each feet, which is easily capable of slicing through a metal fence. So you can imagine what it could do to a human flesh. Now, I think emu attacks are rare, but it's definitely happened in the past. And you can imagine a 6'4" flightless bird with talons. That's basically a dinosaur coming at you. It would be terrifying. So they're big creatures.
So now the stage is set for an epic battle between man and beast. One has the firepower and the other the sheer weight of numbers.
The war began on the morning of the 2nd of November 1932. The men travelled out into the hot, dry plains that lie halfway between Perth and Kalgoorlie, which, as we mentioned, is vast and open and the perfect terrain for emus to run amok. Upon arrival in the area, the men immediately came across a group or a mob of 50 emus. That's what a group of emus is called. Did you know that, Steph?
I did know this.
There you go. I didn't know that.
I've done my research too.
I thought it was a mob of yes, that's true. I thought it was a mob of kangaroos, but there you go. Major Meredith put all his experience from battle and his tactics into use and ordered his men to surround the group of emus. I find it weird that he used military tactics on a bird, which is brains about the size of a walnut or whatever. Well, like, is he assuming the birds are going to use counter tactics? They're
Quite
birds.
possibly. You have to expect the unexpected.
Maybe he had respect for them.
Once the emus had been driven into the shooting range, they were ordered to open fire. Not the emus, the men.
The men, yes.
However, to the men's surprise, they didn't quite get the result they were hoping for.
Oh.
According to accounts, it took around 4 to 5 bullets from the devastating Lewis machine gun for the birds to even realise they were being shot. And then after that, it took about 10 to 12 bullets to finally kill an emu. And that's if it were to stay still long enough to be shot at.
As emus prefer to hang out in large mobs, once the firing had begun, they would disperse, making it almost impossible to track just one of the targets and put enough lead into the bird to kill it. But let's just marvel for a moment at the fact that the bird was so tough, it took 3 or 4 bullets for it to even realise it was being shot at by a World War I and II machine gun. That's pretty amazing. And yeah, as we mentioned, it took 10 or 12 bullets to fully kill an emu, and that's if they got them to stand still long enough, which, by the sounds of it, they'd start off in a pack, they'd start shooting, and immediately they'd disperse, and then it'd be really hard to track one target and get enough bullets on it.
And remember, they can run 50 k's per hour.
Which is fast.
And they're going in all different ways.
That's exactly right.
It's very hard to just track the one of them. At the conclusion of the first day of the Great Emu War, the men had only managed to kill a dozen of the birds out of the thousands that they had shot at. Day 1, you would have to say, goes to the emus. The men had found that the birds were very cunning and proved almost impossible to hit once they began to move and would basically shrug off any bullets that did hit them.
So impressed and bemused by the events of the first day was Major Meredith that he stated, if we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. Maybe Australia should have trained emus to fight in the Great Wars instead of men and women that we sent over there. A few days later, after more failed attempts to shoot down the giant birds, the men tried to change their tactics.
That's where it gets a little bit interesting. They
It
had to
does.
get a bit crafty. They attempted to mount the Lewis gun on the back of the truck and fire at them on the move. However, this idea was shot down rather quickly when they came to the realization that the truck couldn't keep up with the emus running at full speed.
Which I find funny as they tried to change their tactics, put the Lewis gun on the back. I was like, we'll chase them. And then the truck's going over I assume it's really rough ground so they can't keep up. And the emus are just going and taking off. It's awesome.
It's their territory.
It is. It's their domain.
After the first week of the conflict, the troops had fired roughly around 2,500 of the 10,000 rounds and only managed to kill somewhere between 50 to 200 emus, which in the grand scheme of things is not many birds at all.
When reporting these numbers back to the government, it's worth noting that Major Meredith felt it necessary to state that the men themselves had not suffered any casualties, which is weird. I mean, what do they think the emus are going to fight back? It's strange. Questions are raised as to whether a medal would be given out at the conclusion of this battle. I believe this was done with a twinge of sarcasm. Federal Labor parliamentarian A.E. Green replied that if any medal should be given out, they should go to the emus as they had, and I quote, won every round so far, which is not far from the truth.
As the war began to grow in its hilarity amongst the people of Western Australia, they dubbed the Defence Minister George Pearce the unofficial title of the Minister of the Emu War for his involvement in the deployment of his troops.
Very demoralising, I would imagine.
During this time, the media began to run with the title The Great Emu War, making fun of the absurdity of the situation, helping to make light on what was a seemingly doomed project from the start. The majority of the population found the Great Emu War rather silly, much like we do. However, the local farmers throughout WA were apparently very upset.
So you could imagine, as the Great Depression was going on at that time, you're reading in the newspaper about some military troops that had been sent out to kill emus. It would have been infuriating, I would imagine, if you're a farmer. So they were angry at the fact that the government had sent 3 troops to deal with the hundreds of thousands of emus in a state that spans twice the size of Alaska. When you put it into perspective, it sounds even more ridiculous than before. It's worth noting that the troops tried to give up several times, but each time they were sent back out to hunt for the emus.
I think being labelled the Minister for the Emu War maybe didn't sit very well with old George, and he wasn't ready to fail just yet. So he kept sending troops back out even though it had been a miserable failure again and again. Finally, after the troops had expended roughly 9,900 of the 10,000 rounds and amassed the measly total of 986 confirmed emu kills, the war was called to an end, with emus winning the battle without even raising a feather. If our maths is correct, each round equated to about 10 emu deaths.
Those are rookie numbers. You need to up those numbers.
Very true.
So that's a lot of lead for not many kills. And remember, in that exact area, there was approximately 20,000 emus. So they killed less than, 1,000, which is, that's a waste of time, basically. So the quote-unquote war ended, and the West Australian government, ex-soldiers and farmers were right back where they started and still having their crops eaten by the giant flightless birds. As a result, the government did what they maybe should have tried to do in the first place and put out a bounty on emus' heads. Now, I don't agree with this, but it's common practice in Australia in the past for farmers to cull large groups of animals, both native and introduced, that were infringing on the farmland, to collect bounties and ensure that their good crops can grow.
Apparently, between 1945 and 1960, around 284,700 emus were killed in WA alone. Now, an interesting fact about the culling of the emus is that lots of farmers actually chose to breed emus
They
and
did.
then get money from the bounty, which is I like that.
which is a
Bit sad
clever.
that they raise these poor emus from birth. Just
I guess that's better than
like a
just.
bounty.
But I guess that's better than just killing them off and not doing anything. I mean, they were growing them, and that's a clever way around that solution to make a bit more money. Particularly if it was coming out of the Great Depression, that's a pretty good idea. But yeah, it is a bit sad how many they culled off in WA alone. I'm not sure what the other stats are for the other states, but yeah, it's a bit sad.
So by the sounds of it, the emus did win the first Great Emu War, but lost the second.
They lost the second one by a landslide, so
Yes.
you could say it's 1-1. Maybe there's going to be a third one in the
Maybe.
future. We don't know. So ends the tale of the hilarious Great Emu War of 1932. I think if we have learnt anything from this tale, it's that we shouldn't underestimate emus because they are two-legged flightless tanks that are basically immune to machine gun fire. And if you're the Defence Minister, maybe you should employ a mathematician to help you out with the tricky number stuff because Mr. Pearce had no clue what he was doing, sending out 3 troops with 2 guns to kill 20,000 or more emus.
Needs a bit of help with his
To be
police body
fair-
knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. To be fair, I would have thought 2 Lewis guns, which are World War II, World War I, World War II machine guns, would be able to kill
Pretty devastating.
easy kill the emus. But these giant flightless turkeys are invincible, basically.
Invincible.
Wrap up. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of His and Hers History, as told in the His and Hers History way.
I did find it fun, yes.
You did,
Aaron.
and again,
Did you find it fun, Aaron?
I did, and we might do this in the future. Maybe every 10 episodes or so, we might
Maybe.
do one together.
I don't like the fact now that I get all of the odd numbers of episodes.
Yeah, it's
I
flipped
enjoyed
now. I
having the
did think about that.
even Numbers of episodes.
It's a bit of a weird thing. I did think about that. I was going to flip, so I'll have to remember my episode numbers now because it's changed. If you'd like to listen to more episodes, you can find us at our website, hisandhershistory.podbean.com, or where all good podcasts can be found.
Podcasts. We also have a YouTube channel, a Twitter and Instagram account, so come and say hi.
Feel free to like, comment, and follow our podcast on whatever platform suits you and leave any feedback. Do not forget to share with your friends, family, work colleagues, or anyone else that you think might find the podcast interesting. By doing this, you can help us build our community and we can continue to provide you with some entertaining looks back at a variety of historical topics, like today's Great Emu War, which is highly embarrassing for, we'll say WA, we'll separate them from the rest of us. Not a whole of Australia, just WA. So next week is your turn, Steph. So we're back to our normal format of you presenting to me, and then the following week I'll be presenting to you. So I look forward to your topic. It
I'll
should be
see you
fun.
then.
Bye. Catch ya.
Bye.